Recording Sunday, February 27th. We're going to be talking China-Eastern Europe relations with...
Hi, my name is Matej Šimalčík. I'm an analyst at the Central European Institute of Asia Studies at think tank based in Bratislava and Slovakia.
Matej, thanks for being a part of China Talk. How early do you want to start the clock? Feel free to go back to the founding of the Republic. We could do Silk Road, wherever you want to, wherever you want to kick us off with China-Eastern Europe relations.
More or less, China became an active part in this part of the world starting around 2012, when it started its so-called 60+1 platform, uniting various countries of the Central Eastern Europe together with China in a sort of semi-formal or formalized dialogue on various levels of government, culminating in the annual summits of heads of states and heads of governments. However, it's not really that interesting for the current situation when it comes to Ukraine, who is part of this platform. It's much more interesting to talk about who is not part of the platform when you look on the map of the Eastern Europe. And you will see that pretty much three countries of Eastern Europe stand out that geographically it would make sense to be part of the platform, but are not in it. And that's namely Belarus, Ukraine, and Moldova, which has been kind of interpreted that at the time when China was making its first inroads into the region, it did not want to upset Russia and it basically was taking into account Russian interests in the region, and it did not really want to step on Russian toes directly in its front yard, so to say. So yeah, as a result, the Chinese relations with Belarus, with Ukraine, and Moldova were developing really separately from the rest of the region. However, of course, China still has many interests localized there, especially in Belarus and Ukraine. So, for example, the most visible one would be when you talk about the Belt and Road Initiative, which was started around 2013 and was developing over time. The most visible aspect of that is, of course, the train connections, and they pretty much for the Chinese trains to get into Europe, they have to run either via Belarus or via Ukraine. So the situation in Ukraine, and we already know by now that Ukrainian army has blown up the rail connections towards Russia, pretty much impacts the ability of China to maintain the train connections, which were actually over the last 2 years, so with increasing disruptions to sea transportation, were growing on importance for the sake of exporting Chinese products to Europe. That being said, though, this is really a smaller of the interest that China has in the region. When you kind of juxtapose its economic interest in Ukraine with its overall, let's say, strategic interests that it has been spending several years now on promoting in many times in some sort of alignment in some sort of alignment with Russia, and this quest to kind of reinterpret the world order to promote multipolar arrangement of the international affairs. The current crisis in Ukraine, the Russian aggression in Ukraine, when we look on Chinese reaction, we pretty much have to take these two factors into account.
Sure. Let's zoom in then to China-Ukraine relations.
Yeah. When it comes to specifically to China-Ukraine relations, as I hinted before, a lot of the Chinese interests lie in the transportation sector. Ukraine is one of the possible pathways for Chinese products to get into Europe. Also, there's been a lot of interest in agricultural sectors. China has been buying up some agricultural land in Ukraine, which has been developed and of course, agricultural products play an important role in the economic sector. But yeah, bulk of Chinese attention on the Eastern European region was localized elsewhere, and more diplomatic energy was spent on developing relations with other countries of the region rather than Ukraine, precisely because of that Russia factor in the equation.
Sure. So let's talk about it from the perspective of the Central and Eastern European countries. What was the sort of value proposition of tighter relations with China, and how is that potentially changing in the context of this war?
Yeah. When China came in 2012 with the offer to start a 16+1, we have to realize that there was that a lot of the countries of Central and Eastern Europe were a little bit cash strapped at the time in light of the financial crisis. So they have seen in China this kind of potential to bring in new cash into the region by promoting investment, by being able to export to China. And this has been kind of the main factor why a lot of the Central and Eastern European countries were trying to develop relations with China. Of course, it was this kind of analysis was partially influenced by, let's say, sino-romantic perceptions and a little bit orientalistic perceptions of China, where it was seen as this faraway exotic land, which is big and rich. And it's been growing. It's been economically growing for decades at the time, and pretty much Central European and Eastern European politicians wanted in on this economic benefit, sort of, let's say. However, over time, what we have seen was that China was making, of course, a lot of investment-related promises, which have not really always materialized. Of course, when on a closer look on Chinese, let's say, investment in the region, you will realize that not really all of them are investments. A lot of them are infrastructure projects, which are pretty much just a form of Chinese credit lines rather than investment proper. Which, when you look at this from the point of view of those Central and Eastern European countries that are members of the EU, is not really a proposition that makes much sense for them, because from their point of view, Chinese loans, Chinese credit lines are much more expensive compared to what they can obtain elsewhere, either via traditional lenders like European banks and World Bank, and so, or via European structural funds. Of course, the situation is a little bit different when you look on the Western Balkans, for example, where the options to get cheap loans are a bit more limited compared to EU members, where we have seen China be kind of a plan B when it comes to providing financing to various infrastructure projects. When it comes to that second goal that Central and Eastern European countries had with regards towards China, that was related to kind of lowering their or balancing out the trade imbalances that they had with China. Of course, when you look at the structure of the trade between China and Central and Eastern Europe, you will see that pretty much all of these countries have a negative trade balance, which has been growing over the years. And by engaging with China, the countries hope to lower this imbalance by promoting exports. This did not really happen either. Of course, exports as such in absolute terms were growing during the past 10 years. However, imports from China tended to grow even more. So even though all of these countries are nowadays are exporting more to China, the trade imbalance has grown even more. All in all, both from the point of view of investment and exports, these goals were not really fulfilled, and you see now a lot of disillusionment across Central and Eastern Europe, or some sort of promise fatigue among the politicians, who are nowadays much more reluctant to engage with China on this kind of economic issues. While at the same time, we have seen a wave of political change happening across Central and Eastern Europe, where new governments are now coming into power, not the same ones as were in power at the time that this engagement was starting. which are much more critical of China, not only in this economic issues, but also in terms of security and human rights.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah. So let's explore that. Let's explore that dynamic in particular, Matej. What do you think is driving is driving the sort of reeling back from China as a as an economic savior, I guess?
Yeah. So the domestic political factor is really an important aspect here, because in many of the countries, those governments, I mean, pretty much the governments that were promoting deeper economic engagement with China were localized in only one part of the political spectrum. So if you look, for example, Slovakia, on Czech Republic, elsewhere, you'll see that many times it was left-leaning political parties that were promoting these relations. I would not necessarily say that this is ideologically motivated, but these political parties happened to be in power at the time where China started the engagement with the region, and over time, the various measures or various tools, China managed to cultivate key personalities of these parties, either via corrosive capital, strategic corruption, and these kind of problems that we are talking nowadays more and more about. However, of course, so if we look on Slovakia, the country where I'm from, during this time we pretty much had since 2012 until 2020. The governments were pretty much composed around around one of the dominant political parties, which had very more or less quite strongly pro-Chinese positions. That does not mean that opposing viewpoints did not exist in the country. If you at that time when Slovakia was getting more close was getting closer to China, if you would look at the more on the deeper level of the Slovak politics, and you would analyze the positions of the political opposition, for example, you would find a lot of support for Tibet, for Taiwan, etc. So in 2020, there was an election in Slovakia, and the opposition won that election. And even though China was not even was very basically a non-issue in the political race at the time, the election results impacted the foreign policy towards China pretty strongly. Precisely because they already had much more value-based positions on China. And this had pretty much very practical ramifications for China in Slovakia when it comes to, for example, Slovakia's deeper engagement with Taiwan over the past 2 years, more international criticism of China in various human rights fora and so forth. And this kind of dynamic is not unique to Slovakia. Pretty much we have seen the same dynamic happening in Lithuania. We have seen the same dynamic happening in Czech Republic. And we may see the same dynamic again in other countries of the region. If by some luck the opposition in Hungary would win the upcoming elections, it would have similar kind of impact, I believe.
And what do you think the sort of mix is in the frustration? Is it that the sort of economic promises haven't borne it out as much? Is it human rights concerns? Like how would you sort of like, if you have 100 points to assign on what people are upset about, how would you sort of apportion them?
Yeah. Well, it's a little bit of both, or but of course, the economic aspect is very important, because this was the whole driving force behind the original engagement with China. That we want to have more trade with China. We want to attract Chinese investment with high added value, and of course, when this did not happen. It got some people, not all politicians, but a lot of politicians became thinking whether it is worth it to, not deal with the associated security issues or the broader issues of human rights and etc. Whether it's worth it, to kind of auto-censor the political statements, and when the associated economic benefits are not coming.
Yeah. How much do you think China's very ambiguous response to what's happening in Ukraine right now is going to impact these trajectories?
So China and its reaction to Ukraine or the overall conflict on Ukraine and its impact on China's relations with Eastern Europe, it's gonna have a big impact. One reason is that pretty much Central Europeans and Eastern Europeans perception of what makes China an important partner are the train connections, and that's one of the most visible things. And even in countries that were not so proactive in their engagement with China, the train connections were seen as something they want to have because it pretty much brings in money, even if the trains just run through and go towards other destinations. Now it's going to be, of course, impossible. Second, the discourse within Central Eastern Europe about what kind of international actor China is has been becoming more prominent. Discussions about whether what kind of global order China wishes to see, how it is promoting its own interests, where non-existent, let's say, a decade ago. Nowadays, they are much more prominent, and depending on how China reacts to that crisis in Ukraine, it's going to have a really big impact on how Central European and Eastern European governments perceive China. We have to say that, for the countries on Ukraine's border, this is not really any distant crisis. This is really something that we are seeing ramifications of already, with tens of thousands of refugees fleeing Ukraine to Slovakia, to Poland, to Romania, to Hungary. And of course, these are really direct impacts of the crisis of the Russian aggression. And of course, if China is going to be propping up Russia and providing it with its support, that's going to impact, how China is perceived in the region.
Thinking about this in the context of sort of China's broader global ambitions, what's your hot take on to what extent she's happy with what's going on right now?
That's a really good question, and of course, we all want to have an answer to that. But as usual, when it comes to China, it's a little bit of reading of tea leaves. But yeah, let's do some hot takes on this. Even though China has its own economic interests in Ukraine, which are of course endangered, I think that the broader strategic implications are now more important for China. China is not really hiding the fact that they wish to see a multipolar world order where the EU and the US are not really a global hegemon, but just one of the poles of that international order. Russia would be the other one, China another one, etc. And of course, the current crisis can lead to that result, provided that Putin is successful with the incursion in Ukraine. Of course, China is kind of hedging its bets a little bit. It's not providing Russia with a full support. It's still now when they are flaunting the idea that Ukraine's territorial integrity needs to be guaranteed, sovereignty should be respected. These are kind of mainstays of China's foreign policy, which China likes to refer to as kind of normative framing of its own decision-making when it comes to foreign policy. However, at the same time, we see that, China has been really proclaiming that let's not forget that it's the US and the West who's to blame for the crisis, which kind of signals where China stands and what it wants to achieve. Secondly, which is, I think, quite important to talk about, is that over the last decade or 2 decades, let's say, we have seen that the global geopolitical and geoeconomic centers of gravity have been shifting from, let's say, the transatlantic / European area towards the Pacific, which kind of started with Obama's pivot to Asia and has been continued ever since then. Over the past years, there's been even increasing talk about the EU focusing on China and on the Indo-Pacific, what does China mean for NATO and this kind of thing. And of course, this has been putting some sort of external pressure on China and its ability to operate in the Pacific and promoting its own interest there of achieving some sort of regional hegemony. With the current crisis in Ukraine, of course, all the attention is now back to Europe, which kind of provides China with a little bit of more room to breathe in its own periphery and in the Pacific area. And thirdly, of course, a lot of the talk is on what this means for China-Taiwan relations. And even though I don't think that an imminent attack on Taiwan is very likely, still we have to recognize the fact that, of course, China is very closely observing the situation in Ukraine, how the Western governments are reacting to it, what kind of countermeasures they are imposing, and how swift are the reactions. Which, if such unfortunate day should come where China will decide to invade Taiwan, this kind of observations would play an important role in the decision-making process and the strategic calculus of China there.
Sure. So, Matej, what is your take on the EU's response in particular so far?
Yeah. Well, I have to say that the EU response could be much worse. We have seen repeated crises in the past, wherever in the world where EU was really slow to respond, and consensus was difficult to achieve. But with this really a huge crisis, which is kind of unprecedented since the World War II, let's say, I have to say that the reaction of the EU and especially the members of the EU from the Central and Eastern Europe has been quite surprisingly good, I would say. Of course, we have some blunders coming out of Germany, for example, and a very slow response, and not being willing originally to impose some of the sanctions. It's good to see that even though that some of the sanctions could come much sooner, it's good to see that the West, together with democratic allies in East Asia, like Japan, for example, and Taiwan, has been able to put in place really a robust sanctions regime, which can have a very strong impact on Russia. Of course, besides the imminent sanctions, which are going to be very damaging to Russia, it's important to talk about how to, after the crisis is over, how to clean up our own act internally so that we are much more flexible in making foreign policy decisions. I think that the current crisis may kind of speed up the discussions about moving towards qualified majority voting, so that you would be much more flexible and could make decisions much faster in the future. And of course, it's probably gonna speed up also the discussions about various measures to counter strategic corruption and corrosive capital within the EU, which of course have a detrimental effect on decision-making processes precisely in this kind of crisis.
What does that mean exactly, Matej?
So, when it comes to strategic corruption and corrosive capital, we are talking about various ways via which foreign authoritarian regimes have managed to capture European elites. So, for example, some of the investments into critical sectors, or by engaging in various forms of influencing activities. They have been gaining allies, which now may be reluctant to take some of the more to take some of the actions that are necessary to counter the Russian aggression. So, of course, if you are a politician that has been economically benefiting from the economic relations with Russia, for example, you are not going to be very eager to take the necessary countermeasures to prevent further escalation of the conflict. And the presence of this kind of corrosive capital, which is basically capital that is not oriented by market values, it's not very transparent, has become a problem. So if you look on, for example, on the entire city of London, how much Russian capital is located there, or how much capital has been flowing into the EU from China to various types of investments into critical sectors. Those are all really problematic things, and they will need to be handled in the near future. Of course, some of the action has already been taken by, for example, adopting the EU-wide framework regulation on investment screening, or various or the new measures of due diligence. Of course, ongoing discussions about anti-coercion measures. And yeah, this kind of crisis is precisely the time where the debate about adoption of preventive measures like this will be sped up.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting reflecting, to what extent this is going to cause the EU to rethink its long-term relationship with China.
Yeah, definitely. I really think so that it's going to lead to a lot of rethinking across the EU, not only on relations with China or Russia, but overall on how European values are going to be protected, and how and what kind of actor the EU wants to be in the global arena. If we have been already talking about Germany, it's a good example is the long-term reluctance of Germany to be a very active military player in the global in the global affairs. It has been reluctant to increase defense spending to the 2% that are kind of the soft requirements of the NATO. But now, in light of the Russian crisis, of the Russian aggression in Ukraine, we have seen that even after initial reluctance, Germany is now going to be spending has dedicated a lot of new spending to towards its military and defense budget, which are even over the 2% threshold now.
I wanted to come back to a point you mentioned earlier in this sort of Eastern Central Europe, Taiwan sympathy, which has been kind of developing in a really interesting way over the past few 6 months or so. What is driving this impulse?
Yeah, it's certainly very interesting to observe, and several factors are influencing that development. The first one is what I've already talked about, this fatigue with China and its unfulfilled promises. So nowadays, some actors are discovering that East Asia is not only China, that there are other actors with which we can have economic relations, which are going to be which can potentially be much more beneficial than China, without having this kind of political/security baggage, as would be the case with China, which does not really conform to many of the values that we stand for in Europe. Secondly, Taiwan, by some politicians, it is really seen as this kind of anti-China. So the relationship for them is not really motivated by wishing to have a meaningful relationship with Taiwan, but it's really seen as a sort of getting back at China. It's fascinating in its own regard how Taiwan is framed in the discourse of some politicians that we need to have good relations with Taiwan because China is not conforming to our values. So this kind of juxtaposition of China and Taiwan is an important factor in some cases. And yeah, let's not forget that that these relations with Taiwan are really not completely. Taiwan has been in the region of Central Eastern Europe present for quite some time. So if you look on Czech Republic or Slovakia, which have been together with Lithuania and some sort of avant-garde of this new push for deepened relations with Taiwan, Taiwan has already been economically very much a present actor in these countries. It has made substantial investments in the region in the past. It's contributed quite strongly to the workforce, to tax payments and similar. And the countries have been deriving a lot of benefits out of that. And the last factor would be the domestic political factor, which I've said, which I talked about in the past. That now we have new governments in many of the countries that are nowadays much more China critical, which have been having which have been long-term supporters of Taiwan, but they did not have until now the opportunity to impact the foreign policy making.
Matej, because I don't have many opportunities to talk to Slovaks, I want to spend this 10 minutes on this dark weekends reminiscing about the month I hung out in Bratislava on a very odd project, interviewing people about open government and procurement, but also getting to spend 3 of the happiest days of my life at the Pohona Music Festival. What makes this gathering so fantastic?
Yeah, it's really an amazing place. One of my favorite festivals in Slovakia, and it's really special. For 3 or 4 days, you have a gathering of like-minded liberal people, regardless of age. You have young people mixing it with new parents, with elderly people who just come there to enjoy the time, listen to some good music, while at the same time be able to engage in interesting discussions upon the current issues. Because Pohoda Festival is not only about music. A lot of political discussions are happening there. You will see journalists intermingling with festival goers and politicians who go there. It really is a special place. A lot of the NGOs would set up their own platforms there, to promote their own work, and engage directly with people who many of whom are their supporters, for example. So really, it's an amazing place. Of course, unfortunately, due to COVID, the ability to organize the festival has been diminished, and it's been much more difficult to engage there. However, as you said, it's really a great place, and I hope that we're going to be able to soon meet there with friends and enjoy some music.
I just remember, the multi-generational thing really stuck out to me, and then just like they had these book talks and tents and discussions and people debating philosophy and politics, and like people would go to them and would sit there and listen and be really engaged. And like just thinking about in American music festivals, where they try to do some like art or culture thing on the side, it's kind of like a joke. And, you'd maybe get like 5 people who want to hang out in that tent because it has like better AC or something. But regardless, it was really special. And, there was something magical there. And I do hope to make it back at some point in my life. So anyways.
Yeah, you're definitely sure.
2023, we're going to have a China Talk tent. Maybe I'll set up a little desk and we'll record some live shows.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so. That'll be really a great platform. Yeah, and I hope that I'm really glad that, that's just back on you, because as you said, the spirit of the event is truly something special. I think it was 2017. I was doing some work there as a representative of the NGO that I was working for at the time. Manning our own booth, and it was really amazing to see. It was an anti-corruption NGO, and it was really amazing to see a lot of the young and older Slovak just to stop by on their way from one concert to another to discuss corruption and how to prevent it in Slovakia. For a few minutes, and it was really a great energy.
Yeah. You know what it made me feel also, Matej? Like that I'm so spoiled living in America. Just because the reason there isn't that sort of energy is that like young liberals don't feel like they're in a minority, right? And they don't feel like there's like a entire country which is sort of arrayed against them. And that, is that feeling this was pre-Trump, right? So I think the vibe is a little different in the US maybe before then. But
yeah.
Thinking back to like, it comes back to the Ukraine story as well. It's like this whole freedom thing you really can't take for granted. And I don't know, is that too much of a stretch? What do you think?
No, it's definitely not a stretch. We should definitely never take freedom and rights and liberties as granted, because once you do that, that's precisely the point when they become endangered. It's a constant process to make sure that democracy is preserved, and that various negative forces which are present, in every country, do not get the ground to backpedal on democratic development.
What's up, mama? Som na Bahamách, žerem ananás. Oranžový sunrise padá na nás. Big boy gleb, na tekvici baketeta bandana. Wu-Tang Clan, dala. Yo, what's up, mama? Som na Bahamách, žerem ananás. Oranžový sunrise padá na nás. Big boy gleb, na tekvici baketeta bandana. Wu-Tang Clan, dala. No chýba mi môj motherfucking balkón a výhľad na hrad. Parky, parkoviska, rap, svobodnožný chlap. Opilecké debaty pred Istanbul kebabom. Na sebe bandana, bucket hat, merch along. Sliv, freestyle z kufra, letná furka. Zaparkovaná sedba repra, podzemná hudba. Púšťam New York boom bap, ako cez starý boombox. V mojom meste treba vedieť, kedy máš naradiť moonwalk. A nedela vždy býva taká bolestivá, preto radšej nechodíme spať a po travinách bereme vína. A nedela vždy býva taká bolestivá, preto radšej moje pamäti tá sviňa chýba Lil Wigga. Brada from Anada Mada mi rozpráva, že sa mu rozpada jeho dlhoročný vzťah. Smoking raw, OCB, vodky gin, bol si zlý, no a čo? Dal si letu ako puberťák. Yo, what's up, mama? Som na Bahamách, žerem ananás. Oranžový sunrise padá na nás. Big boy gleb, na tekvici baketeta bandana. Wu-Tang Clan, dala. Yo, what's up, mama? Som na Bahamách, žerem ananás. Oranžový sunrise padá na nás. Big boy gleb, na tekvici baketeta bandana. Wu-Tang Clan, dala. Mám rád rap. Harlem, Brooklyn, Queens a Bronx. Cypress Hill, hit from the Bronx. Zvrdí vonku, to sa ma tlačili ganžu ako Snoop. Kým som to spýtoval v štúdiu, fire in the pool. Ďaká takým ako ty vravia, že rap je primitívny. Vo svojom texte povieš A, nepovieš Z. You feel me, tvoja skupina je nulová. No ja nemyslím tú krnú, stále máme radi hudbu, hnusnú, špinavú a tvrdú. Gauča bass, to není copy and paste. Super freak, Rick James. Veľké disky vystredali street a skate. Ice Cube shit, it was a good day. Juicy J, UGK, Hurricane Chris, ABB, Southside Bay, all day play in mojom aute. Super duper fly, astronauti. Big boy gleb, bandana, bucket hat. Bolo to studené letu a poste, čo bolo vtedy. Ja som big boy gleb, bandana, bucket hat. Zavolaj ma na feed, už to nebude tvoj track. Big boy gleb, bandana, bucket hat. Bolo to studené letu a poste, čo bolo vtedy. Ja som big boy gleb, bandana, bucket hat. Večer výzvom, parkovisko a rap. Urob creep walk. Šušťakový weirdo, back on the block, yeah. Urob creep walk. Šušťakový weirdo, back on the block. A nenávidím tracky o lete, no keď píše pero za mňa, tak to musí byť pravda. True, raperi sú smrti, ktorí nestarnú. O mesiac vyrážame späť na túr. Čas na zešla krak. Čas na zešla krak. Buď freak. Urob hook. Love it, man.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
I am excited to announce the Adweek Podcast Network, the first ever podcast network created for brand enthusiasts and anyone curious about the latest trends in marketing, advertising, technology, and culture. Adweek has partnered with leading industry voices to bring you analysis of trends, pressing challenges, and to share top-tier insights to help you level up your career, creativity, and strategy. Starting April 12th, you will get to hear brand new shows like Young Influentials, The Speed of Culture, Adweek Presents, and some of your favorites like Yeah, That's Probably an Ad, CMO Moves, and Season 2 of Metaverse Marketing. We are also happy to be the new home for amazing shows like Brave Commerce, The Great Fail, and To Dine For with Kate Sullivan. Learn more by visiting adweek.com/podcasts. That's adweek.com/podcasts.
Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Acast recommends.